Beans and cornbread every week. Sounds pretty good, doesn't it?
It does.
It's hard to go wrong. My biggest problem this morning was trying to decide what to eat. When we walk in there and all we got all this good food laid out, you know your stomach's only so big. That's a good problem to have. We're going to finish up Revelation chapter 4 tonight. And I trust that you are enjoying this. This is chapter 4 and chapter 5 are absolutely fantastic passages. And it's so important. This afternoon, I was looking over things and I went on to chapter 5 and was reading down through some of chapter 5, and then you turn the page for chapter 6. And it's like the rest of the book of Revelation just slaps you in the face. And it's so important before we see all the chaos and all the judgment and all the terrible stuff that happens to see what John sees. And tonight is one of those pivotal things. And I wanted to start off tonight by reading the whole chapter, put the whole passage together as we finish this part and get ready to move on to chapter 5. So let's start back at verse 1 so we can get the whole scene. After this I looked, and behold, a door was opened in heaven. And the first voice which I heard was as it were of a trumpet talking with me, which said, Come up hither, and I will show thee things which must be hereafter. And immediately I was in the Spirit, and behold, a throne was set in heaven, and one sat on the throne. And he that sat was to look upon like a jasper and a sardine. There was a rainbow round about the throne, in sight like unto an emerald. And round about the throne were 24 seats, and upon the seats I saw 24 elders sitting, clothed in white raiment. And they had on their heads crowns of gold. And out of the throne proceeded lightnings and thunderings and voices. And there were 7 lamps of fire burning before the throne, which are the 7 spirits of God. And before the throne there was a sea of glass like unto crystal. In the midst of the throne and round about the throne were 4 beasts full of eyes before and behind. And the first beast was like a lion, and the second beast like a calf. And the third beast had a face as a man, and the fourth beast was like a flying eagle. And the 4 beasts had each of them 6 wings about him, and they were full of eyes within. And they rest not day and night, saying, Holy, 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 Lord God Almighty, which was and is to come. And when those beasts give glory and honor and thanks to him that sat on the throne, who liveth forever and ever, the 24 elders fall down before him that sat on the throne, and worship him that liveth forever and ever, and cast their crowns before the throne, saying, Thou art worthy, O Lord, to receive glory and honor and power. For thou hast created all things, and for thy pleasure they are and were created. Let's pray. Father, you are worthy, and tonight we want to see how worthy you are. We want to see how these folks worshiped you. We want our hearts to be touched to worship you as you deserve to be. You have created all things. They exist for your pleasure, and that includes me. And so I want to bring you pleasure and not heartache all the days of my life. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. We see the beast, and I like the language here in verses 10 and 11 because it just continues with one. And they're sitting here crying, Holy, 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 Lord God Almighty, constantly. And verse 9 flows right into verses 10 and 11. And I was really tempted to try and do this together, but hope you understand why I separated it and spent so much time with each part of it, because it really is that important. Can you imagine the scene? These 4 beasts are walking around and they're crying out, Holy, 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 Lord God Almighty. And they're giving the reason why as they give glory and honor and thanks to him. And it flows right into the 24 elders that fall down and they join in worship. And if you've cheated and gone ahead to chapter 5, you see that other folks join, and then eventually you have this large host of angels that join, and at one point it says all of the created beings give him glory, because all the created beings ought to give him glory. That's why they were created in the first place. What I want you to see tonight is these 24 elders are going to worship him for 2 reasons. And they're going to worship him in two ways. And it says a great deal about God in both of these. So let's start with they worship him for two reasons. We're going to skip over some things and come back to them because of the two ways in which they worship him. The first reason is because of his worthiness. We see it in several different things that are described here, but it says they fall down, and it's an act of submission because they are before someone who has greater authority. We're going to deal with this more in a minute because it's one of the ways in which they worship him. But it's also a reason. Notice it says they fall down before him that sat on the throne. And it might go without saying, but I believe it's important to say it and to think about it. They are not on the throne. They are worshiping the one that is on the throne because they're not on the throne. You say, well, of course they're not on the throne because God's on the throne. Listen, how many times do we live our lives as if we're the one sitting on the throne? And maybe it would change our life now, not just when we get to heaven, if we would realize he is on the throne. And I really appreciated Langston Sunday School this morning because I believe Abraham comes to that point. I mean, God's been dealing with him and dealing with him and dealing with him and dealing with him. And then he asks him to do this incredibly difficult thing. You're going to sacrifice your only begotten son, Isaac. And you say, well, wait a minute. He's the only child of promise. It's the only way God was going to do it. It's not man's attempt through Hagar and Ishmael. This is God doing something that nobody else could. That passage is so amazing to me. I mean, if you're ever bothered and really worn in the spirit, just go back and read chapter 22 of Genesis. It's incredible. He doesn't bat an eye. He doesn't hesitate. In fact, he hurries to do what God asked him to. He gets up early in the morning. He gets everything ready. He uses it as a teachable moment when Isaac asks questions. He uses it as a teachable moment when the servants are down there at the bottom of the hill in the statement that he says, we will come again, knowing full well that he's supposed to go up there and offer his son. And he has no idea how God is going to work this out. But I'm with Lance. I fully believe that he thought he'd raise him from the dead, if that's what it took. I think somewhere along the way, Abraham stopped trying to do things his way. Oh, we got to lie about Sarah being and say you're my sister, which was half true because she was a half-sister. At some point in our lives, we got to stop with the half-lies. I know everybody calls them half-truth, but if it's only half a truth, then it's and a lie's a lie. So maybe we ought to start calling it what it is. And I believe Abraham did. And he's, I'm supposed to own all this land, and then the Philistine king comes over and they reach this kind of agreement. And it's interesting that right after they reach the agreement, God's going to talk to him about his promise of the land. And Abraham at some point says, if I have to sacrifice Isaac, I'll sacrifice Isaac because I don't sit on the throne. Somebody else sits on the throne. And if he made this promise, then he is going to fulfill it. Here we see a picture of these 24 elders who willingly fall on their face because they don't sit on the throne, even though in life sometimes we're proud and we act like it. Another thing I want you to see is they're not seated. It says the 24 elders are standing around. There's only one person that's seated because he's done and because he has the authority to do so. They worship. Why? Because he is worthy of it. And we're going to unfold that in a minute. And notice that they also talk about his eternality. They worship him that liveth what? Listen, at some point, mortality has to bow before immortality. And realize that because we're mortal, we don't always see things the way God sees things. We look at something and we say, boy, this is a long, drawn-out, tough temptation. Listen, it's like that to God. And he knows what I can handle, and he knows how much I can take, and he is working it out to accomplish something in my life. I'm not on the throne. Why am I acting like it? In fact, I'm not even seated there comfortably in control. I'm standing as a bystander watching the one seated on the throne who has all the authority. In a little bit, we're going to talk some more about casting crowns, but it says they took off the crowns and they cast them at his feet. What's interesting is this shows his worthiness because they gave something of value to the most valuable. When you think about it, these folks are now in heaven. They don't have any earthly goods with them. They're wearing robes of righteousness, which Jesus Christ has given them. They're wearing crowns, which Jesus Christ has given them. And they don't have any problem taking off this thing that we would think is a symbol of authority down here and something of such great value. And they don't think anything. When they start praising him, they just rip them off their heads and chuck them at him. Because in comparison, how much more valuable is God than this little crown that Jesus Christ gave me? Not to diminish the reward. You understand what I'm saying? But if the reward is very, very valuable and it's been given to me by someone who desperately loves me enough to die for me, and if it represents something that I have accomplished in his name, then chucking it at somebody else's feet must be showing a great deal of worthiness. And then they say, verse 11, thou art worthy. Worthy for what? Glory, honor, power. Why is he worthy? Well, they show his worthiness by recognizing him as creator. Somebody asked me a question a couple of years. I had a long conversation, almost 3 hours at the fair that we used to work with up in Bucyrus. And a gentleman came up and he obviously believed in evolution, and we got in a pretty good discussion about it. And instead of arguing with him, I was just asking him questions, and it was a very civil conversation. And it was interesting because there was almost nobody in front of our booth for all afternoon long. And one of the girls brought the young man to me and said, I want to introduce you to so-and-so. He has a few questions for you, and I can't answer them. And I told him I know somebody who probably could. And I said, well, if I can't, I'll find an answer for you. So if you're here at the fair later in the week, we might have to talk again. Always leave the door open. We began the conversation, and it wasn't long before there were like 15, 20 people all resting by our booth. We're getting out chairs and setting them out there, and everybody's, trying not to listen, but man, were they listening. And when there was a bunch of noise, you'd see people leaning toward us because they wanted to hear the conversation that was going on. And after about 2 hours of conversation, this young man proceeded to tell me that he goes to church, but that he doesn't believe that God created anything. He's a stern believer in evolution. And he says to me, do you believe that somebody who believes in evolution can be saved? And I think I shocked him right to the core, because I didn't even think about it. I said, no. I shocked some of the other people who were standing around. He looked at me and he said, why? And I said, because God says in Genesis 1:1 that he created the heavens and the earth. And if he lied about that, why in the world would I trust him for salvation? Listen, if you can't get over the fact that God is creator and you realize that he put all this stuff together with a purpose, what is redemption? Do you notice that they didn't start with redemption? That's chapter 5. They start with God in chapter 4, and you are worthy because of who you are. And then they move into you are worthy because of what you've done. They still haven't talked about redemption. They talk about creation. When we get to the next chapter, they're going to say, worthy is the Lamb because of redemption. And yes, it's God's plan and Jesus' plan from the beginning. And yes, Jesus Christ was involved in creation. But do you see? To us, sometimes we look at it, we're going to celebrate it tonight, right? But we think, man, he is so great because he did something for me. And that's not the right starting point. The right starting point is he is so great because of who he is. Which makes the fact that he would do something for me so unbelievable. So unbelievable. All things exist for him. He made the crown. He made it possible to give us the crown. He gave us the crown. Why wouldn't you throw it back to him? I mean, seriously, what did I do? We'll get to that more in a minute. They worship him because of his worthiness, but they worship him because of creation. What's interesting, this word worthy is axios. It was used of the Roman emperor when he marched in a triumphal parade. So you'd have all of these folks, and sometimes these parades would take a long time. They'd bring in these generals with all these warriors, and they'd bring in all the armor, and they'd bring in their biggest things, and they'd march them in front of everybody, and everything would be all polished and shiny, and then they'd start bringing in all the goods that they had captured. And oftentimes they would load weapons and armor from the defeated folks, and they'd put them in wagons, and they'd put them in such a way that they would be piled up, and the sun would shine and glint off of them as they went down the streets. And often they'd bang around and make a large noise. And then they'd bring in all the captives, and they'd be chained or tied together with ropes, and they'd walk down through there. And then finally, here would come the emperor with his finest clothes on. And by the time the emperor came, you were so impressed by the army and and then all of a sudden, wow, here's the one responsible for it all. You see what the 24 elders are doing right here? They are parading before us the axios of creation and saying, you want to know what's better than a Roman emperor who conquered some po-diddly little country somewhere? I'll tell you. He is worthy because he is the creator of everything. You want a parade for an emperor parade? Okay, let's make a parade worthy of God. Let's line up the fish and have them swim down through here in all their glory. Let's line up all the birds and have them fly down through here in all their glory. Let's get all the animals and parade them down through here in all their glory. Let's get the trees and walk them down the streets, and you look at all the different fruits and nuts and all the variety that goes on. Let's talk about the water cycle. Let's talk about the sun. Let's talk about planets. Let's talk about magnetism. Let's poke out a human eyeball, put it on a stick, and walk it down through town so you can realize how incredibly amazing it is, and he gave every one of you 2 of them. Let's pull out the mechanics of the ear with thousands of little engines all working in perfect harmony so that you can hear my voice. Let's talk about our breathing system and our circulatory system. Let's talk about DNA. Unbelievable amount of information. I mean, it's mind-blowing. National debt. Billionaires. I'll tell you what really gets me. There's 2 things that just blow my mind. The Trinity and DNA. I mean, you start breaking it down. You got this little thing, and 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 take off a little piece of skin and hand it to somebody, and my goodness, you can regrow another person. The axios. He's so worthy because of creation. The leaves are changing. In a couple of months, the trees are going to be dead, but they're not. Isn't that amazing? Read an article yesterday morning in Georgia. Oh, be aware, if you find this fish, be careful, because that sucker can breathe on land. And all the evolutionists are like, ooh, see, it might be one of the missing links. You know, this thing can survive for hours and hours and hours on land. My God has built so much adaptability into his creation, it blows my mind. Blows my mind. Blows my mind. And that's exactly what John says here. He created all things. And you look at that and you say, oh yeah, big deal. Nothing exists that he did not create. Nothing. You say, what's the important part of that? Here's the important part. You ready? If he created all things, then who has the right to judge it all? Because guess what happens in chapter 6 when the Lamb opens the first seal? And you say, I don't understand how a loving God. You know what? You don't understand God at all then. Because God created it all. It's made for His glory, and He can do whatever He wants, whenever He wants, and however He wants with all of it. Because nothing exists that He didn't create. Go a step further. Nothing was created that He did not will. Therefore, He created everything with a specific purpose. And how inappropriate is it of me to start living my life as if He doesn't have a right to have some say about it since He created it? It was created for His pleasure. It's meant to bring Him honor and glory. And here's the problem. We have destroyed that in two ways. The first one is we worship the creature more than the Creator. We see that in Romans chapter 1. And then we've corrupted His creation, and in Revelation 11:18 we see that it's groaning and we're going to be held accountable for it. Since He created it, He has the right to judge it. They worship Him in two ways. First one we already alluded to is submission. Submission. You say, why is this so important? Because in submission you show He is worthy. And the second way we're going to get to here in a minute is praise. They say it, and that's saying He is worthy. It's interesting to me that these 24 elders show He's worthy, and they say He's worthy. How many times have you heard, have you ever told so-and-so you love them? No, but I know that they know. Listen, there's something to being said for saying it. And they're not ashamed to say it. They show it in a multitude of ways. They fall down. It's a position of reverence, fear, and respect. It's willing humility in the presence of true greatness. I remember going with my grandfather, my cousin, my uncle, and my dad to Cooperstown, New York one time. And one of the Pirates was supposed to be inducted into the Baseball Hall of Fame. And my uncle and my cousin thought it was a really big deal. I liked the guy, so I was pretty excited about it too. And we were there, and all of a sudden, my cousin Randy got really excited. And he runs off in the crowd. And he comes back a few minutes later, and he's like, "You're never going to believe it, Robbie." Pittsburgh accent. And I said, "What's that?" And he said, "I just got an autograph of Dwight Eisenhower's grandson." And my first thought in my head was, who in the world knows who Dwight Eisenhower's grandson is? Well, the obvious answer was my cousin and my uncle, because they were both so excited about it. Can you imagine the grandson of Dwight D. Eisenhower? I mean, you talk about a man. My goodness, they were excited about being in the presence of his grandson, for crying out loud. And John says, I want you to know how excited these guys are to be in the presence of true greatness. Not somebody's grandson. We're talking the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. But here's what's really interesting. Because a lot of times we think about this submission aspect as a fear and reverence, and man, I don't want to be in their presence because they're going to strike me down. But there is another word that he uses here that's really interesting. Before we do that, by the way, side note, this is the first of 6 times that the 24 elders fall on their face before God. 6 times from here to the end of the book, these 24 elders are going to fall flat on their face before God. That's pretty significant. They're doing that out of reverence, and they are, but let's link the second word too, because the second word completes the picture. In the middle of to lick like a dog. You say, what? Okay, imagine this. Beasts are flying around crying, holy, 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 Lord God Almighty. You have this incredible scene that we have seen. The throne and what's around the throne and sea of glass and emerald rainbow and all this stuff going on. And these 24 elders are so overcome, they fall flat on their face and they begin to lick like a dog. When does a dog run up to you and just start licking all over your face? Why? You push them away and they just keep coming back, right? I'm so glad to see you. And you're like, oh, get up, get off of me. I mean, they don't care if they tongue you. They don't care if they stick it in your eye. You know what the picture here is? This is not a picture of cold worship. God is saying, yes, there should be fear. Yes, there should be reverence. Yes, there should be respect. But these 24 elders fall down to worship Him like a dog licks your face. They just cannot get enough of Him because He is worthy. And they worship and worship and worship. And if He pushed them away, they'd be right back at His feet, worshiping and worshiping and worshiping like a licking dog. So I had to ask myself, am I a licking dog? Do I shower Him with love and praise? And am I public, personal, and passionate about it? Or am I so worried what somebody's going to think of me? Because when you come home and your dog runs up to you to lick your face, he could care less who else is in the room, and he could care less what else is going on. He really don't even care if you want to be licked. He is so overcome with emotion, you are getting a tongue somewhere. And it is pure adoration, and it is pure affection. And that's why we call him man's best friend. So can I ask you, when you worship, are you God's best friend? Is it pure, unselfish adoration and affection because He's worthy? Part of the submission, they cast crowns. They are not concerned about self-promotion or accomplishment. They are willing to give up their best and their most valuable to Him. Everything is created by Him and everything comes from Him. Reminds me of a couple of other ways Paul said it. I can do all things through, except you abide in me. If I can do all things through Jesus Christ, but I can do nothing without Him, then it seems to me that the reason they're taking off the crowns and chucking Him at His feet is the same reason that we tithe in church today. Because we recognize that everything comes from Him. And certainly I can't necessarily give everything back to Him. I can't when I get to heaven. I can throw every crown at Him. Because I'm not going to need anything. He's taking care of that. I can't necessarily do that here. But my attitude about my giving can certainly be one of a licking dog. Well, I mean, I guess we have to because we got to fix the roof. Or I guess we have to because, no, it doesn't matter the amount so much. I'm impressed with how many times God said, listen, if you can't do this with the right attitude, then don't do it at all. I mean, as if giving $1 million does anything for you. The same reason we tithe is the same reason these elders are celebrating in heaven, because they recognize that God is responsible for all of it. I'm not just giving back a portion of what He gave me. That's natural, isn't it? So submission. We've got to close because we have to be. The second one is praise. It's saying it. Worthy of glory and honor and power. There have been some figures in history that have had power and they weren't worthy of it, haven't they? I mean, I can think of some right now around the world that aren't worthy of power. And a lot of them think they're worthy of glory, but they're not worthy of glory. And some people think they're worthy of honor, and they're not worthy of honor. But He is. And so we have this picture of 24 individuals who are representative of the church, and they are worshiping in awe and wonder as God prepares to judge sin. Because we have to make sure we don't lose track of the context of this chapter and the next chapter. We have a picture of Jesus Christ. He deals with the church because we saw who He was. And then all of a sudden, John's like, he's caught up in the beginning of chapter 4, symbolic of the rapture. And now God is getting ready to deal with the rest of the world. But before He deals with the rest of the world, He gives us these 2 chapters of who He is. And so you have 24 elders who are falling down before Him, just pure, unadulterated worship. licking dog passion poured out at his feet. And what's he getting ready to do? He's getting ready to hand the book to the Lamb of God. He's going to tear open the first seal. And my goodness, folks, holy terror is about ready to be unleashed on earth. And while holy terror is being unleashed on earth, do you know what's still happening up in heaven? 4 beasts are trotting around all over the place crying, holy, holy, holy. And the people in the presence of God are so overcome with love and passion. They're throwing themselves at his feet and throwing their crowns at his feet, saying, you're worthy. And there are people down on earth cursing him, questioning him, slandering him, telling him to drop dead. How could a loving God, John's telling you how, judgment of sin, it's a necessary part of redemption. We're going to study that tonight. And I think it's interesting that we're having communion right now tonight. Do you realize that when Jesus Christ died on the cross of Calvary, he didn't circumnavigate, he didn't shortcut anything. He paid sin's price in full. God didn't say, well, that's okay, for the sake of my son, I'm going to excuse you. No. He might not be holding you accountable for it, but he held somebody accountable for it, and he died on a tree a long time ago so that he wouldn't hold me accountable for it. It makes it right. It makes things work properly again. It restores the relationship. And it delivers us from the consequences of sin. God doesn't have to judge us like he's getting ready to judge the rest of the world from chapter 6 on. Because he already dealt with sin. So he either deals with sin in your life now, or you deal with sin in your life later. What God does is a result of who he is. That's what John's trying to tell us. So if you don't understand who he is in chapter 4 and 5, then you don't understand why 6 through 22. Worship who he is. Then worship what he's done, starting with creation, moving to redemption in chapter 5. Today was a great week. Fantastic week. It's hard to imagine a better week. And the most interesting part is I got great news right after our JV football team had lost their game. And the JV volleyball team is in there playing their heart out, and they just lost their game. And Little Feet came down to tell me this great news, and varsity's in the middle of losing their game. And then Friday night we go to Union, and our varsity football game team lost their game too. And you say, how in the world could you be so excited when 4 teams lost this week? Because it was the greatest week in all the world. I found out 2 little boys trusted Jesus Christ as their personal Savior. And that lasts forever. And if Jesus Christ tarries, there will be another volleyball season. And there will be another JV football season. And there will be another varsity football season. But there will never be another 2 of those. Turn with me to 1 Corinthians chapter 11. Starting in verse 22. For I have received of the Lord that which also I delivered unto you, that the Lord Jesus, the same night in which he was betrayed, took bread. And when he had given thanks, he brake it and said, Take, eat, this is my body, which is broken for you. This do in remembrance of me. After the same manner also he took the cup when he had supped, saying, This cup is the New Testament in my blood. This do ye as often as ye drink it in remembrance of me. For as often as ye eat this bread and drink this cup, ye do show the Lord's death till he comes. Wherefore, whosoever shall eat this bread and drink this cup of the Lord unworthily shall be guilty of the body and blood of the Lord. But let a man examine himself, and so let him eat of that bread and drink of that cup. For he that eateth and drinketh unworthily eateth and drinketh damnation to himself, not discerning the Lord's body. For For this cause many are weak and sickly among you, and many sleep. For if we would judge ourselves, we should not be judged. But when we are judged, we are chastened of the Lord, that we should not be condemned in the world. Wherefore, my brethren, when you come together to eat, tarry one for another. And if any man hunger, let him eat at home. And ye come not together unto condemnation. And the rest will I set in order when I come. Listen, in light of what we've just been studying, verse 32, I'll jump right off the page with you. But when we are judged, we are chastened of the Lord, that we should not be condemned with the world. We're supposed to take the communion service, and we're going to do that in just a minute if the men come and prepare the table. But I don't know, every month, I don't know if you've noticed or not, I've been asking the same question. It says on the front of our communion table, this too in remembrance of me. What do you remember about him